Living abroad has made me hunger for more. I do not want to stay in one place and just stay there for the rest of my life. No, I want to go out and do something, help other people, go and travel to experience more cultures and immerse myself in them.
Welcome to the Venture-Ette podcast, where women from all over the world share their stories of travel, moving abroad, and creating a new life for themselves, hoping to inspire you to live out your dreams by showing you how other women did it. I'm your host, Venture-Ette, Ashley.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Venture-Ette podcast. I'm Ashley, and I am so grateful that I get to sit here and share with you guys all these amazing stories of these strong and beautiful women. Today's guest is someone who is near and dear to me. Though we are family, what I love about our relationship is that we can connect and that we have both lived in various countries over the years, though she's been doing it for a lot longer than I have. She's 18 going on 19, but she first moved abroad when she was just 7 years old. From growing up in Mexico, she first moved to India, then Chile, then El Salvador, then Argentina, and finally the US. Though she didn't do this on her own and she had her family to do it with, she still gained a sense of independence from living and experiencing so many cultures at such a young age. And also, while she did grow up privileged, being the daughter of a diplomat, she grew up well aware of the poverty and the struggles that people faced on the daily around the world. This has inspired her to pursue a career in the medical field, as she has a true passion of wanting to help as many people as she can and those who are less fortunate. She will just be starting her first semester in college this fall, but she is wise beyond her years, which is why I'm so excited to have her on the show to share with us not only how it was living in these countries, but how it was to transition from one place to another, especially at such a young age, and how this has really helped shape her into the woman that she is today. And finally, share how these experiences has truly inspired her to give back and help as many people as she can around the world. So without further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome my cousin, Maria Fernanda.
First, I just want to say thank you so much for being with me today, even though we are over Zoom. What I just love about you is that even though you're 18 going on 19, you've lived in so many countries. You lived now in like 5 countries. And when you first moved abroad, I believe you were 7 years old.
I was 7 years old.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little about how it was for you, like in Mexico a little bit, because that's where you grew up at first. And if anyone knows anything about Mexican families, is that Mexican families are very tight knit. You're always together, right?
Yes, always together. So I was born to a single mother in Mexico, Tijuana. My mother worked really hard to make sure I had all the resources I needed. And we did not have enough money to buy a house or an apartment. So I lived with my grandparents. And my grandparents were so nurturing and giving. But to be honest, I didn't see my mom that often, like even in weekends, she would be gone working. So I remember when I was a little girl, always praying for a father figure in my life because I wanted to see my mother and I wanted a father. But I loved my Mexican family. Having a Mexican family is amazing. You get carne asada, although I do no longer eat meat, but families are so tight-knit.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing that I love about our family. And then also too, I remember when you were very young and I would come visit, I would even babysit you because your mom was constantly working. So I definitely just remember that you and I, we got to bond in that way. So I definitely hold that near and dear to me. But because you were so close with your family, eventually, your mom did meet your now dad. And that really changed everything for you because it wasn't long until it was decided that you all together were going to move to India.
Yes. So my mother, she actually met my father at a work party. And from there, they just fell in love and got married a year later. And I remember I was so excited. I was around 5 the first time I met him and 6 when they got married. And I remember that my father, since he is a diplomat, he would need to travel very often. So when my parents married, that meant that we would be moving to India with him for a period of 2 years. And I was so excited, but I was also very scared. because I had never seen the world like this. I'd only gone to Mexico and to the US and only San Diego. So I didn't know much about the world. So I was very excited. And I did not speak English. So when I got to India, it was very hard for me to communicate with people because the main language they speak there is also English. They have 300 languages there, but mostly everyone speaks English. And I couldn't understand what they were saying to me. So I remember I would often get lost in conversations and also lost at school.
Yeah, because even when you were growing up, I would speak to you in Spanish. So the fact that, you said you were excited about India and then you got there. So how, even though there's like a language barrier, did you still feel that excitement when you first got there, or did like nerves start to kick in?
So I would say it was a mixture of both because I was very excited to be in a new country and experience this totally new culture. But I was also scared because I did not know anybody there. All that I had known was basically torn apart. And my family, like my Mexican side of the family, lived in Mexico and they lived thousands of miles away.
Yeah. And so how was that for you? Even though you like felt excited to go, I mean, how did you feel about like leaving your family behind? Did you get like emotional, or because you were so young, you didn't really realize like the actual change that was about to happen?
I was definitely emotional, but at the same time, I didn't process the change that was going to happen. I was only 7 at the time, so I didn't process it very well. So it was definitely a shocker when I got to India, but I loved it nonetheless.
So how did you like grow to be more like accustomed to like the culture? Because at the time you were only speaking Spanish. So how was it for you having to really like better your English and interacting, with the locals and the people that live there?
So because I didn't speak English, it actually made me learn English in 1 year. I learned it very fast. I picked it up and I had a British accent at that time. I no longer have it now, as you can tell. But at school, they would teach me. And I remember there was this really nice girl who was from Spain that would always help me because she spoke Spanish and she also spoke English. So she would teach me as well. And I just got to learn the culture by traveling. Even not speaking their language allowed me to see their culture and to understand them in some way.
So what were some things that, even though you were learning to understand the culture, like were there any kind of like initial culture shocks? Because like you said, you had only really known Mexican culture and a little bit of American culture in San Diego, but now you were in India, which is completely different. So what really stood out to you when you like first moved there?
Yes, there was a complete culture shock. I remember when I first got there, everybody would come to me and pinch me on their cheeks and say, "Oh, baby, sweet baby." And I remember I used to get so mad because I used to tell my parents, "I'm not a baby, I'm 7." The people were super nice there. And if you had a close friend, you would call them auntie or uncle.
Which even like in a lot of other Asian cultures, because I have like a friend who is like Laotian, and it's kind of the same thing. Like even though they might not be like blood related, but because you're so close to the family, you would call them like auntie or aunt or something like that.
Yes. And also, they have a lot of traditional dances in India. I remember that my father, in order for me to learn the culture better, he signed me up for kuchipudi dances, which I'm sorry to say now, I don't really remember them, but I used to love going there.
Yeah. So you really obviously were immersed. I mean, you were living there, you were going to school. And how did you find the food? Because they always say, as children, you're quite picky. I mean, did you embrace the food at first, or were you kind of resistant to it?
No, I embraced the food. The food was delicious. It was so good, especially the naan bread. I used to eat a lot of that, but it was definitely really spicy. So when you went to restaurants, you had to make sure that they would mild it down because if not, you would be leaving with a red face and red ears.
Yeah, the spice level is a whole other level over there. I mean, I haven't been, but that's what I've heard. So, I mean, you were really like loved and embraced there, and you befriended people. And I think that's something that I feel like tends to happen quite often. I mean, you move to a country, and even though you might not know the language, you tend to find someone who is willing to kind of help you out. And like you said, like learn the language and, learn the culture. So you really got to explore Asia because you went to, even though you were living in India, you traveled to like Thailand and other parts of Asia. Yeah.
Yeah, Nepal as well, Singapore. It was the most amazing experience of my life, honestly.
Yeah. And you were so young. And so what are some things that you really remember so vividly from traveling to those countries?
So I remember their culture, but one thing that really stuck to me and really sticks to me today, although it's not a very nice thing, is the amount of poverty that I found in those places. And to this day, it has really inspired me to try and help people and to look for a job that will help people in third world countries.
Yeah, and that's the thing with poverty. You can't not be exposed to that and not feel compelled to, do something about it, no matter how big or small. So, I mean, you were there in India for 2 years and you really embraced the culture and the life. So, when you were told that you were going to have to move again, I mean, how did you feel about that?
When I was told I had to move from India, I was very sad because India, as weird as it may sound, it was a place where I had my normal childhood. I felt safe. I knew my friends and I loved the culture and the people. And so when I was told that I would be moving to Chile, Santiago, I was honestly sad. But when I moved to Chile, I loved it there just as much as I loved India.
So did you feel like it was still quite easy for you to like make friends and really get used to the culture? Because you were still really young. You were like 9, if not 10 at the time.
I was around the age of 9, maybe 8 when I left. But yes, it was easy for me to make friends over there just because I was so young and so oblivious.
Yeah, you're just like, for you, you're probably thinking, oh, this is like one, kind of long vacation. But, Chile and especially Santiago at the time, is such a clean and, beautiful country. And India is still beautiful, but, it's just vastly different. So how was it you transitioning from like, India's culture to Chile's culture?
So the cultures are radically different, radically. Also, the way they speak Spanish is very different. For example, like you might say taco for a taco, like a Mexican food taco, but in Chile it was, oh, there's a lot of traffic. Or polola y pololo, which is boyfriend and girlfriend in Chile. And the people there were slightly colder than they were in India, because in India they would just come up to you, like I said, and just touch your cheeks and say baby. And in Chile, it was a little colder.
Yeah, and that's what I remember hearing a lot about is that it was a little colder, so people really kind of like to have their distance and whatnot. So because, you grew up in Mexico, you were in India and now Chile, you were learning different, languages and dialects of, the same language. Did you feel like that was just kind of easy for you to pick up because you were so young, or were there times where you were just a little overwhelmed with all the different dialects, languages?
I would say it was easy for me to pick up because I was young, and it's easy when you're young to learn things. But some things did come as a shock. Like, for example, I said taco meant traffic. For me, that's food. So I was like, what are they talking about?
Yeah, I totally get that. Because, when I was like living in Spain, like one example is, in Mexico, we say tío as in like uncle or tía as an aunt. But then, you say those words in Spain and it refers to just kind of like tío is like some guy and tía is like some girl. But it's one of those things that when you're so immersed in that culture and you're living there, it doesn't take long for you to really pick that up and remember, oh yeah, this means this here.
Yeah, you definitely pick it up fast, especially when you have to live in that place for a long period of time. I lived in Chile for around 3 years, and I have to say I did love it. I ended up loving it, and I still love it now. I remember I love the scenery. If you ever go to Chile, you have to hike. It's definitely a hiking place.
Okay. So then what is one hike? I mean, you were there for 3 years. So if you go there, what is one hike that you really remember vividly?
Well, I remember in my house, we had these mountains and they would go on for a long time. And it was a long passageway. And so I would go there for runs with my father and we would just hike for a couple hours and come back. And I remember there was a guard also on that mountain who would allow me to mount his horse and ride around for a little bit.
No, it sounds beautiful. I definitely need to make it over there. But also I want to touch a little too, because, like in India, like you said, there's, such extreme poverty. And then when you went to Santiago, it was a little more rich and stuff like that. Did you notice that kind of difference at all?
I definitely did notice that. And I also noticed the struggles of the working class. When I lived in India and in Santiago, we did have helpers working for us. And I remember just hearing their stories and sometimes how people would treat them on the streets. So I became very aware of that too.
That's the thing, like every country, has their poverty and some more so than others. So because of the different poverty levels in various countries, did that install like any fear in you? Like when you were in India, did you ever feel like uncomfortable to kind of go out and about on your own? Or did you feel more comfortable in Chile? Like how was that because of the different types of poverty and how things were going on in those countries?
So in India, I was not allowed to go alone beyond my neighborhood. My neighborhood was guarded, so I could play with the kids there, and my parents would let me out for hours on a day. But if I wanted to, let's say, go to a market or the mall, I would definitely not be allowed to do that unless I had my parents with me. And in Chile, I was still young, so my parents didn't really allow me to go out like that. But if I wanted to go to a friend's house and stay there, by all means, like even if it was far away, I could do that.
Yeah, it's just very interesting how, of course, and even though like you were still so young, how in some countries you would, or if not, your parents would feel more comfortable for you to kind of do some other things on your own. But then, of course, that really drastically changed because you moved from Chile to El Salvador, where you really were kind of restricted in what you could do.
Yes, I moved to El Salvador, I believe, around 2013. And I was around the age of 11 or 12. And it was a big shocker again. Just like always, when you move around, it's always a big shock. But the people were super friendly, super nice. And there was definitely a lot of poverty there.
Yes, it's definitely what I've been told. El Salvador is not a place to really travel or visit anytime soon because of the conflict that's been going on there. So for you, what did you have to really get accustomed to living there because of all the conflict and everything that was happening?
So when I lived in El Salvador, I was definitely really restricted. There were only a certain amount of places that I could go. I was still allowed to go with a big group of friends to a place, but never alone. I could never do anything alone. If I wanted to go, let's say for a run, even around my neighborhood, I was not allowed to do that just because it was really unsafe and they were having problems with the guerrillas.
And what are the guerrillas for the people that don't know?
They're like band groups who fight against one another and they might kidnap like a certain person and demand money. And my father was a diplomat, so I was an easier target.
Gotcha. Okay. So of course that is a huge difference from what it was in Chile, in India, but what did you enjoy and what are some things that you really grew to love even though there was all this conflict that was happening?
So in El Salvador was actually when I first got my surfing experience and I loved it, even though I fell down many times. But the food I thought was good. My parents didn't so much. I tried a pupusa, which is basically bread filled in with cheese and any other toppings you want, like frijoles, meat, if you eat meat, anything like that.
And so how was it for you then just kind of getting used to the culture and befriending people again? Because at this point, you were in Chile learning another dialect of Spanish and now you're in El Salvador. So how was it for you just kind of getting used to that language and that culture?
So again, they had different words in El Salvador. Even though they did speak Spanish, they had a different kind of dialect. For example, like if something were cool, it would be like que chivo. They would use words like that. And I remember that when I went to El Salvador, I found it a little bit harder to make friends at school because everybody at the school I had been to had known each other since they were in kindergarten. This was not that much of an international school. So it was harder for me to build those friendships and for people to relate to me and for me to relate to them.
So what did you do to kind of push through that, to like get your group of friends or what did you do?
So I moved around through friend groups and found the friend group that suited me. They were super nice and they were all from El Salvador. They were not from other places.
And so what did you kind of learn from befriending that group of friends?
I learned about their culture, what they like to eat, and the way they speak. They taught me to understand what they were saying to one another, like Chivo, like had mentioned.
So I feel like in the end, it kind of really benefited you because it's like you really got to like embrace the culture by befriending people that are truly from there rather than students who are international.
Yes, it was definitely very eye opening because regardless of the fact of me living abroad, I should relate to people who also have stayed their whole lives there and learn from them too because they have valuable stories.
Exactly. And that's how I feel like it's been for me as well, like moving from country to country, that even though I would meet a lot of international people, I really do value meeting like the local people and really just getting a true sense as to how life is in that country, which I feel like makes it so unique. But yet again, I mean, you finally found your tribe after jumping around. But then, of course, yet again, I mean, it was time to leave. And at this point, I mean, you were a teenager or about to be a teenager.
Yes, I would have to say that was one of the hardest moves because I was a teenager now and I felt that I had built the right friendships and I loved my friends in El Salvador and I didn't want to leave them because I had spent 4 years of my life there, which is like the second longest time that I've ever lived in a place. And in Mexico, I only lived there for 6 years, but I was so young and I didn't know anything. In El Salvador, that's where I had truly built my friendships for 4 years. So it was definitely tough to move to Argentina.
So, because, like you said, you were really, kind of probably devastated to leave your friends. How was like your perspective or outlook on moving to Argentina? Like, did you feel like you were still open and going to try to make it work? Or were you just kind of being resistant to it because you really just loved your group of friends and the life you created in El Salvador?
Okay, I'm going to be totally honest. I was definitely resistant. I was definitely resistant when I got there. It took me around 3 months to actually truly love Argentina. I was just so hot headed. I wanted to go back to see my friends. I was tired of moving around.
And I can only imagine because I was like that too. But the thing is, for me, I was the one that was choosing. But for you, like it wasn't your choice. It was, your family's decision. So how did that affect you with your relationship with your parents, the fact that you were moving so much, and especially at this point when you were now in your teenage years?
I have always had a close relationship with my parents, but since every teenager goes through that mood where they get kind of angry at their parents, I definitely did have that phase because I did want to go back and there's nothing that I could do because I just wanted to have stable friendship and get to know a place and relate to other people.
And it's so interesting that you really felt that at that time. I feel like anyone would, because I know I went through that period of time as well, that even though I was choosing where to move, I was also getting to that point where I was like, I actually really do want like those close friendships and those connections with people with staying in a place, longer. So I can totally like understand that feeling that you want to have. But like I said, I had the choice, whereas like you didn't. So what did you do to kind of learn to just embrace Argentina and this new life?
So I would embrace Argentina in around a period of 3 months. I didn't want to, but I ended up loving Argentina, the culture, and the people. Argentina has one of the friendliest people in the world. They're very Italian. If you don't know a stranger, they'll come up to you and greet you and kiss you on the cheek. There is so much life over there. You can go out at, I don't know, 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, a weekday, and there will be people partying.
Yes, I definitely remember that because Argentina was where I finally got to visit you after all these years. And I spent 3 months with you guys. And that was something I noticed too, is that even if they don't know you or don't really know you, they don't really care. If they think you're like a good person, they'll really make an effort to, I don't know, spend time with you, talk with you. And it was just kind of overwhelming. It's just like, oh, wow, I'm feeling so embraced and almost feeling like part of their family, even though you don't really know them. So I'm sure that made it easier for you, as like you said, to like embrace the culture and really get used to your new school.
Yes, like you had mentioned before, Latin families are very close together, especially Mexican families. So going to Argentina allowed me to relate to my family in Mexico as well.
Yeah, they're so tight knit. But then again, you're learning another dialect of Spanish. I remember that was a bit of a culture shock for me, the way they pronounce their double L's is instead of y, it's je. And there were some parts of their Spanish where it almost sounded like a little Portuguese to me a little bit.
Yes. So, for example, if I were to say yo in Spanish, it would be sho in Argentina, or like lluvia would be lluvia. So anything that has a double L is pronounced sh. And also, they would say che a lot and vos.
Yes, vos. I remember instead of tú, which is you in Spanish, they say vos, which is kind of similar to the you in Portuguese.
Yes, I think you pronounce it você. I'm not entirely sure. I tried to learn Portuguese for 1 year, but I've forgot my pronunciation.
So how many, like, because you've moved to all these different places, going to different schools, I mean, how many languages would you say you learned over that period of time?
So I know Spanish and English very well. I tried to learn French. Unfortunately, I gave up in school. I thought this was too hard. I'm still going to try to learn it. And in Argentina, I learned Portuguese, which sounded a lot like Spanish, so I can understand Portuguese. I still have a hard time speaking Portuguese, and I would like to continue practicing it.
No, and that's good. And I feel like that's so amazing that because you were living and traveling to all these places, you've gotten an opportunity to learn and even practice like all these languages. So in Argentina, you were embracing the culture, you finally grew accustomed to it. But then yet again, you knew that there was going to be an end date. And that meant for you to go back to San Diego. So knowing that that was going to happen, how did you feel about Argentina? Or how did you feel about life, that this life that you grew up in was going to come to an end?
Again, I was sad. My move has happened recently, actually. I was 17, almost 18 when I moved out of Argentina. So it's almost been a year since I've moved out of Argentina. I miss Argentina a lot to this day. I miss the people. I miss my friends. I miss their food. I miss the close connections and the amount of freedom I had in Argentina. I had so much freedom over there. I could take the train and ride it all the way to my clubs and to school and to my running club.
Yeah. And also too, because, you're much older, you're a full blown teenager. And so of course that would allow for more freedom. So, I mean, now that this life has pretty much kind of ended in terms of that, it's no longer your parents deciding where you're going to move to. Now you truly have that freedom. So how do you feel like your life abroad growing up has really prepared you for, entering adulthood?
So my life abroad has definitely made me more independent. I am still a little dependent on my parents, and I will be moving out of my house soon because I will be starting college. But I would say for sure that I'm definitely more independent. It has taught me to open up my eyes to the world and try to relate to people, because when you're abroad, you can't always rely on certain people because you're doing this alone.
Yeah. And that's so interesting that you say that, because it's like, you live this life with your family, but like you said, you were still pretty much on your own because, your dad was busy working, your mom, she was doing her own thing. And then eventually, your brothers came into the picture and that was her focus. So then there you were, just this girl who was a lot older and was able to have all this independence. I don't know. I feel like that's just so unique for you to say that, because I feel like for many women who travel abroad, they also gain a sense of independence.
For sure, you will become more independent because you have to teach yourself to do things alone, because sometimes there won't be people there to help you. So you have to learn to do those things by yourself.
Exactly. And I think that's one thing that your mom and dad has done so well, is to guide you in a sense, but still making sure that you are learning or figuring things out on your own. But I just want to also kind of ask is that, you've been in the US and this is the first time that you've been, in San Diego / kind of Tijuana when you see family. It's your first time being back there, living there since you were, 6 or 7. So what is your perspective of San Diego now compared to how it was when you were younger?
So my perspective has definitely changed, in good and in bad ways too. I love living here as well, but I do miss living abroad because Although I have friends and family here, when I lived abroad, I felt like I could truly connect to those people I had friends with. For me, it takes a while to warm up to people and to open up a little more to them.
I feel like, yeah, for most people, it kind of takes a while to open up, and especially as you get older. But one thing that I just kind of found interesting when I spoke with your mom earlier, it was that everything that you thought was going to be coming back, it wasn't necessarily the case. And that's something that I went through similarly coming back to Portland, was that even though some things were the same, at the same time, so many things were different. And one thing that was different was myself. And I had a hard time relating, to the people and really connecting to the culture here in the States.
Yes, when you live abroad, you're going to have a drastic internal change. And you will also notice that when you come back, your family, your friends are going to change. And sometimes your connections are going to drop because your lifestyles are so different and you can't understand one another. And sometimes that's okay.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important lesson, especially to have in general, but especially for you at such a young age, to realize that change is always going to happen. And sometimes it's good and sometimes bad. And also the fact that friends, they do tend to come and go, unfortunately. And I really love that you really learned that, on your own because of your experiences.
Yeah. Some people are going to stay in your life for a certain amount of time and help you grow. And sometimes they have to go. And I have definitely had a handful of those experiences, especially from living abroad, because you try to maintain those close connections, but sometimes they dilute over time.
Exactly. And so because, you were living in all these places, I mean, I'm sure that, yes, you've had to kind of lose some friends, but do you still stay in touch with some friends from the other countries you lived in?
For sure. I definitely keep in touch with friends from all over the world. I would say because I was so young in India, unfortunately, I was unable to maintain in contact with those people. But I definitely stay in contact with the people in Chile, in El Salvador, in Argentina, and some friends that I had in Mexico.
That's so beautiful to hear. And also because you've befriended, all these people like around the world, what is your perspective on the world? Do you feel like intimidated by the world, thinking like it's so big, or do you feel like it's helped make you feel like the world is a lot smaller?
I would say both, because living abroad has made me hunger for more. I do not want to stay in one place and just stay there for the rest of my life. No, I want to go out and do something, help other people, go and travel to experience more cultures and immerse myself in them.
And I think that's a great goal to have. So you said you really want to help people. So like, what is your biggest goal with that? Because I know you're going to go to college and you said you're going to study biology. That means you're going to go in the medical field, right?
Yes, I'm going to go into the medical field. And I really hope this is one of my goals is to work with Doctors Without Borders. I would truly love to work with them. And also, I know this is very ambitious, but I hope to one day, or if not, help a nonprofit organization in a third world country or build one myself just to help people get education, because education can get you out of any situation.
It really can. And honestly, I don't think that's a goal that's too big. I feel like that's definitely attainable. And because you've seen so much of the world and you really see what's possible, like you said, because especially of having education, I know that you're going to get the education that you need and you'll be able to accomplish all of that. So one of my final questions is that what would you say about someone who wants to live abroad? Like, I mean, what advice would you give them?
I would say do it. It's going to open up your eyes so much. You're going to experience new cultures and it will get hard. And when it gets hard, do not give up, because trust me, there will be periods in your life that you'll be asking yourself, why am I going through this? Why am I doing it? But you should push beyond that, because once you push beyond that, everything will be amazing.
And I just still can't believe you're only 18. But I love that you are so wise beyond your years. But I couldn't agree more that, life in general, whether it's abroad or, at home, wherever you are, it will always there will always be some sort of hurdle that you have to push through. And there's a quote I heard recently that the only way through it is through it, or something along those lines. So thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing your perspective. You've definitely lived quite a unique life and only so young. So I can only imagine what you're going to accomplish in the future.
Thank you so much. I love you, Ashley.
I love you too. Thank you.
Welcome.
For more information on travel and life abroad, go to VentureEtte.com. If you enjoyed this episode, let me know by leaving a review. And be sure to follow me at VentureEtte on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Safe travels, and until next time.